Well, good morning or afternoon or wherever you are in this world. My name is Tracy Wilson Rossman, founder of Journal My Health, and I'm here with my good friend Joyce Griggs, who is the founder of the United States of Healthcare. We're very, very excited today to have Cynthia Adinig as our guest. And I met Cynthia at a conference in December, and I just loved what she is doing. Unfortunately, under not great circumstances. So Cynthia is a marketing specialist, and unfortunately has become a long COVID and MECFS advocate, an equity policy advisor. She has been recovering from long COVID since March of 2020. So she's one of the early folks. And she has been part of many projects, including planning and speaking at the Invisible Disability Panel with the Massachusetts Department of Public Health. And she's been a speaker at many other conferences, along with the one that I was at where I met her. She wrote a digital emergency room guide for long haulers of color to increase their access of care. And she is now has launched the BIPOC Equity Agency. And that is a multidisciplinary consulting agency advancing racial equity and support for underserved communities. And she has founded this with several partners who are all women of color who have had long COVID and other chronic issues. So Cynthia, it's great to have you on today. We really wanted to start off with talking about being a mom and having a chronic issue, which is something that we don't talk about a lot.
Yeah, that part has been really, really difficult. And especially since very recently, like this summer, my son is back to having long COVID symptoms, which I thought he was recovered from. He had it mildly at the beginning. We only noticed like a little bit of fatigue just for maybe a couple of weeks, but that's really about it. Since we all had it mildly, I thought he had just, slowly recovered and was fine. But then this summer, as I was getting better and more well, and starting to plan, like, going outside for walks with him, boom, he gets hit with long COVID symptoms. And so to have that at the same time was really, really difficult because often long COVID symptoms don't mesh well with each other. They can clash. So whereas I was at a space where I needed to be very warm, he was at a space where he doesn't tolerate the heat. That made life, just that in itself, was very, very difficult. And then knowing how like what his new thresholds were while trying to figure out my thresholds of exertion that changed by the day, it's it's really, really difficult to juggle. And then you've got all this mom guilt of, well, how did I miss this? Or did I miss something else? Or was I just so sick that I didn't realize it was there? Or has he always been sick and I hadn't noticed? There's so many things as a mom that you think about when your child is not well. And then there's a 6-month wait for post-COVID clinic. So I had to really go at it on my own, with no guidance whatsoever. And so I leaned to the same people that helped me with my symptoms, which is the MECFS community. And he's doing much better now. He's still not well, but he's doing much, much better. I'm no longer terrified like every day that he's going to end up in the ER, unlike myself, who was in the ER like a month ago. So.
Well, I'm really glad to hear that he's doing better. I mean, that must just be so, difficult, as you were saying. Can you just go back and tell us a little bit about, you mentioned a community and you did use an acronym. Can you just tell us that acronym and the community that you've been using
Yes.
to help you through this journey? And,
Absolutely. It's the Myalgic Encephalomyelitis Chronic Fatigue Syndrome community. That's MECFS. MECFS is known as a post-viral, post-infectious, or even asymptomatic onset of chronic illness. It's generally tied to people who get Epstein-Barr virus and end up developing these long-term chronic symptoms that are very, very similar, most of which are literally exactly the same as the symptoms that I experienced. And when they saw people getting long COVID, or when they saw the pandemic, the advocates in that space, when they saw the pandemic happen, they started like searching the news for people who were sick like me to reach out to and help them along the way. And they eventually found me, and they are the reason why I can walk again. They are the reason why I'm not in the hospital every week. They are so much of the reason why I have hope, because a lot of them have been sick for like 30 years. And so it gives me hope that I'm not slowly dying, even though a lot of times you can feel that way with long COVID.
So they actually sought you out.
Yes, they were they were very, very sick. The advocates, one is Rivka, who most people in the space know because she's been sick and an advocate for 30 years and has done stuff with members of Congress for 30 years, for several decades. And then you have Wilhelmina Jenkins, who's the first Black woman in America to be known to have had ME/CFS back in the time where scientists were saying it was mostly a white woman's disease. And so she really was in that space doing the work that you see me doing now, laying that foundation for the work that I can do today. And I have the utmost respect for her. I think she's like the only Black woman for a long time, so many years. This is back in the 80s. Back when I was very little and I didn't know any of this existed. They were working hard to make things better in post-viral illness. So they really helped me recover.
It's an amazing story. Well, and just continuing on with the support system, what would be a couple of things that you might recommend, for any COVID long haulers out there who are feeling like like you were speaking, alone and just, okay, am I dying? Like, what the heck is happening here?
Yeah, strangely, the Facebook support groups have been fantastic for me. If I hadn't found them when I found them back before long COVID had a name, I don't think I'd be here today. They were able to tell me different medicines to try and things to look out for in those early days where there was no research about what was happening to our bodies. We didn't even have a name. NIH, CDC didn't even talk about it, getting sick and not getting well. So yeah, the Facebook support groups really were there. One, we were sharing labs. We were like, what's going on? What are you experiencing? Oh, you're having flares around your cycle. Oh, us too. And then we were able to talk to other chronically ill people, like from the Lyme community. They're like, oh yeah, this sounds like our flares. Like, you guys aren't dying. I experienced this with Lyme. And so it will lead me to like, oh, go try infectious disease and see if they can give you a diagnosis. And there's a lot of really brilliant people in that first wave. We had to be in order to live. And so I would say most any Facebook group that's like large Facebook group with long COVID is a safe place to land and get really good information. It's really, we take the science very seriously. So you're not going to be seeing just random wrong information. And some of the groups, we were doing our own studies before NIH CDC were even remotely close to listing how many symptoms and issues. So you can get like the best up-to-date information in those spaces. And it's actually a really, they become my family. We really actually do for each other. It's not like those, local mom groups where you kind of have like these lighthearted interactions. No. We do for each other. Like, we will intervene on your behalf. We will make sure you have groceries. We will make sure you're not living in your car. Like, we do for each other, especially in a mostly women-centered illness. We make sure that everyone has resources.
So Cynthia, your child your little boy is 7, right?
Yeah.
So when you first were diagnosed and, things were pretty dire, how were you able to explain to him what was going on? And, how did you help him cope?
That's a very good question. So he was 4 at the time. And I was really, really, really ill. It took Man, it wasn't until, I'm trying to think, it probably was a year into it that I really could sit him down and say, what's wrong with mommy, as I was trying to figure out, one, what was wrong with me, and two, because he's profoundly gifted, but also four, it's very hard to know what he knows, what he doesn't know, what he can handle emotionally. And it really took a time where we were just going out to a doctor's appointment. He was having a meltdown that I sat down with him. I was like, what's wrong? Like, why do I keep seeing you having these issues whenever we leave the house? And he was like, oh, I think you're going to the hospital and I don't think you're coming back. And that is when I knew I had to sit down and say, okay, we're just going to a doctor's appointment. Mommy's doing a lot better now. I know you've seen the ambulance haul me away a lot, but I'm having less of those times. We know what's wrong with me. I'm just getting there to going to the doctor so that I don't get more sick and that I can recover. And this is from COVID and I didn't get better. So that probably was like the end of 2020 that we had that conversation. At that time, I was still really struggling with mobility and he was having to push me in the wheelchair. It really, like, our lives went from mommy taking you for walks and doing fun science experiments to mommy's in a wheelchair and can't remember her address. So it was a drastic change that he saw in me. And he was freshly weaned. He did not want to stop nursing. He still did not go easily or happily. And when I weaned him at 4, so he had only been a couple of months weaned when I got sick. So just me being away in the hospital was really difficult for him because he had never been away from me for more than like a day. So it was a lot. I was really worried that it was going to traumatize him. And so that is why I didn't go as much. But when he told me, there was this time when I asked him, like, why don't you talk to me when I'm in a hospital? And he's like, well, I think you're going to die in there and not come back. Like, he would never like video chat with me in the hospital. And I thought, of all things, he'd want to see my face every day, but he would never even come to the phone. And so that's when I knew, like, I had to really start talking to him more about it. But at that time, talking was difficult for me. Sentences was difficult. I had so much inflammation in my brain and weakness from all the starvation that this cognitive impairment was so steep. It was that part was even harder than just figuring out where to land on the language that's appropriate for him because of my symptoms.
Mhm. Wow, that's a powerful story. I mean, how do you, I know, you're not a child psychologist, but you're a mom, right? And you talk to other moms. So how was it that your child was coping during this period of time? I mean, is there any stories in particular that you can tell us? I mean, you've told us a couple.
Yes, absolutely. So I grew up gifted and I would draw a lot, like, my entire life. And so I knew I wanted to give him some type of art to in his tool house early, to try to have something to rely on when the world gets confusing. And so I did a lot of art with him, painting of various mediums. He started playing a lot of instruments very early on. And so I noticed that when I would be home, he was playing the piano a lot. And when I was bedridden, he would just come over to me, which is right next to the piano. He'd be like, I want to play you something, mommy. And so he actually taught himself how to read sheet music at 4 when I was sick. And that is still where he goes to. The piano is where he goes to. He's been playing around on the piano since he was a couple months old, but he's completely self-taught. And so he got like this app that taught him different things. And so piano is where he really, really leaned on and really helped him through the space. He was like, I want to play something dark, or I want to play something jazzy. And he would just play around and make up songs. And it was actually really comforting to have that, to sometimes, fall asleep to when I'm scared to death to fall asleep because I'm so sick and I was having heart palpitations constantly at the time. So it was a comfort to me, and I think it was a comfort to him too.
So Do you have resources? I mean, it sounds like you had a way to figure this out for yourself, but what resources would you recommend to moms, other parents who are also going through, chronic issues, serious illnesses from themselves, that you have come across?
I would definitely just say like the different groups that are based on that illness. So recently I became part of I found a multiple chemical sensitivity support group, which is one of the things that I developed. I didn't have it at the beginning, so I developed it about a year and a half into long COVID, which basically means that I have an allergic reaction to very mild smells. It can be organic, it can be an actual chemical, food smells, all food smells. I have a reaction to where my throat feels like it's closing, and it's starting to in a flare get very, very bad where I'm reacting to water touching my hand. I'm reacting to touching metal, which is horrible. And so getting into that group recently has been amazing, as amazing as finding the MECFS community. So I would definitely say whatever your illness is, especially if it's a rare illness, go and look for those advocacy organizations, because those advocacy organizations often have support groups to tap you into. And wow, they have been so they really worked so hard the first day to get me better and tell me things that I never would in a million years have thought of to try to increase my quality of life, and just be there when I say I don't know what I'm going to do because the hospital doesn't know what to do to treat me. Like, do you have any ideas of what I should do in an emergency? And surprisingly, they did. And so I was like, I wish I had you guys sooner. So, yeah, they have those. There's no illness that I've seen anyone with long COVID have that didn't have a name or a support group to it. So I would just say, as soon as you find the words of said illness, find that support group. And if you can't describe your symptoms, the MECFS community is where to go, because all of the things that we've experienced, even as things progress, there's not a single symptom that they haven't had. I didn't even know what that name was. Multiple chemical sensitivity. How am I supposed to know that what the name of reacting to all these smells are? And so it was the MECFS community that led me to that community as well. So they're really good about rare diseases.
So we definitely want to talk about what's happening with women of color in the system. To close up this other segment, what advice would you give to other parents? They're sick, and they're taking care of children. We've already talked about how you described your symptoms. You did talk about going to these groups that have been a lifeline for you, but are there other resources or ideas that you may have for them before we go over to
that is really difficult. Sadly, it doesn't really exist for long COVID. Long COVID in kids is very under acknowledged in the space. It's so, and it's really sad for me, because I know when I saw my son and I had a pulse oximeter and I could check his oxygen and I saw it fluctuating and I saw his heart rate fluctuating, I immediately thought of the other parents that wouldn't have that on hand, that would miss that and wonder why their kid is so sick, and wonder why their kid is progressively more sick, and wonder why their kid suddenly can't go to school and can't concentrate, and why this kid is having emotional meltdowns. So no, I don't think there's any. I mean, Long COVID Families is an organization that has popped up for long COVID in kids and how it affects the families. That's the only space I really know. It's a nonprofit that is really tackling this, but it's a very small space. There's so many people who don't know their kids have long COVID, And there's other people who also don't parents that don't know they have long COVID. So there's just not there's just not any good outside of long COVID families. That's the only place, which is a Facebook group, and it is actually a nonprofit now. But the resources to just know step 1, step 2 of like, what do you do when your kid has long COVID? Like, I'm in the process of writing that for long COVID families, but because there is no space that tells you, and all I'm doing is taking the information that I got from the MECFS community with my real-time experience of how the system works now and developing that for them. But I don't know any space that's like, get the pulse oximeter, check their diet, pull out the sugar, check their heart rate every day, monitor how the mental exertion is affecting their heart rate, and all the granular things that I was doing to able to stabilize my son. That information isn't really out there, which is why I'm also working with the post-COVID pediatric clinic that he's going to go to. The director asked me to work with her so that I could help them give that guidance to parents too, but because as of now, that doesn't exist.
Great, so it's coming.
Yes, as soon as I can write my little, type my little fingers of my experience, I will get that out there. I never wanted information, like I have this fear that information is going to die with me. So I try to write as much as possible to get that information out. Also, if I'm sick and patients can't come to me directly, like a lot of them do, I want to have something that's public facing and accessible to them to always have. So that's why I started writing. And it's also therapy for me because my symptoms are very cruel in that the histamine from crying, which is very therapeutic and good to do when you experience trauma in these difficult times, actually makes me worse, like 1,000 times worse. Like if I were to share if I were to get upset to the point where I shed a solitary tear, I probably wouldn't eat for the rest of the day because it brings my histamine up, and I have don't just have multiple chemical sensitivity. I have mast cell activation syndrome, which is directly tied to histamine. So I can very well send myself into starvation if I let myself wallow and cry, even though I'm definitely due for a solid cry. I can't with how I am right now. So writing is what I'm doing to get that pent up sadness that I have especially from my recent experience in January. It's the only thing that I can do to just relax myself and release myself right now. So that's what I'm doing.
So thank you so much. And
Thanks for having me.
we can have you back on.
Cool.